Hello. So this week is Parashat Shelach, and the main topic of this parsha, aside from perhaps a little bit in the very ending, is the story of the spies, the story of the Meraglim in Hebrew, where Hashem and Moshe agree to send together one representative from each tribe, not, of course, excluding Shevet Levi, to go and see the land of Israel before they come to it, and to come back and give some sort of a report about what the situation is in the land. And when they come back, so aside from, they split into two camps. There's the pair of Caleb and Yeshua, Caleb and Yefuneh, and Yoshua bin Nun. Yoshua bin Nun we know, of course, as Moshe's manservant or sort of squire, and Caleb was the representative from Yehuda, who go to look at their land, and they come back and say, we can do this. This is the right place for us to be. Of course, it's the right place for us to be because this is where God has decided to send us. And Yoshua, and the rest, all the other 10 are saying, no, this is a very dangerous place to be. This land isn't good. There's too many dangers over here. The indigenous population is too powerful. And eventually the people follow those 10, which leads to the calamity, which we know results in God punishing the people of Israel to stay for 40 years in the desert and not go straight into the land of Israel. So today we're going to talk about a midrash that discusses this issue. It's a very short midrash that talks about the difference between Caleb and Yoshua. Okay, so we'll look in the verses and see that there really is a difference. But first, let's look at the midrash. The midrash says the following thing: Vayikra Moshe leHoshea bin Nun Yoshua. So right before Yoshua and Caleb join the 10 and go off to the land of Israel to sort of scout it, Moshe calls over Yoshua and he gives him a new name. He basically adds a yud to his name. His name originally was Hoshea bin Nun, and he adds them a yud at the beginning, turning it into Yehoshua. And so the Midrash asks, why did Moshe decide to do this? Why did Moshe decide to add this letter to Yeshua's name? So it says like this: Ela Kalev natal scharo min haaretz, shneimar velo yeten et haaretz asher darach ba. Caleb received his payment, his sort of reward for being faithful to God from the land by getting a piece of the land. And then they quote the verse that says that he will get it. Yoshua natal schar aseret hameraglim. Yeshua's prize, Yeshua's reward, was that he received the sachar, the reward of the 10 spies. Shenitwasef al shmo yud 10. Shneimar vayikra Moshe leHoshea bin Nun Yoshua. So, because in gematria and the numerical value that the Hebrew letters have, yud is 10, and there were 10 other tribe leaders that went on this, that eventually betrayed their task, betrayed God. Yoshua got their reward, their portion. Okay, whereas Caleb got his reward from the land. דבר אחר, כיוון שראה משה אותם המרגלים שהיו רשעים, אמר לי יהושע, יח יושיעך מן הדור הרע הזה. So the other answer is that when he saw that the 10 other leaders, Moshe saw that they weren't people of great stature, so he gave Yoshua some blessing, which was in a sense some way of protecting him. Okay, he said that Yud stands for Yah, which is one of God's names, and so it's saying, may God protect you. Okay, and Yoshua's name then become Yahoshea. So Hoshea means to redeem or to protect, And so Yahushua, meaning Moshe is saying, may God protect you from these people that you're going with. Now, the question, of course, is what is the meaning of this difference? Meaning, why would Kalev get a different prize, a different reward than Yoshua? And why is it that Moshe, when he arranged for this, to give the name, why was he more concerned about Yoshua than about Kalev? Especially if you go by the second explanation. The first explanation is talking about some sort of prophecy. Maybe Moshe even didn't know, but that symbolically this represented Yoshua for some reason getting the reward of the other 10. So we need to understand why it is that each of them gets a different reward. But according to the second explanation, where Moshe was already worried when he sent them out, then why wasn't he worried about Kalev? What is it about Kalev that's so special? Now, this midrash also seems to connect to a lot of other midrashim, or these several famous midrashim, that talk about the difference between Kalev and Yoshua. For example, when they do eventually go to the land and they start moving around, it says that they were walking around, and then it says Vayalu b'negev vayavo ad Chevron. So Vayalu in plural, they came up to the Negev. Vayavo in singular ad Chevron. And so the Midrash says, and I think it appears in Rashi, that Vayavo is said in singular because Kalev at some point went off on his own and went to go personally to Chevron, which is an area which eventually comes into the land, the area of Yehuda, from where he is a representative of Shevet Yehuda, and this fits into the idea that that what we say that he got as a prize the land that he walked. Okay, wherever his feet touched, that became his property, or in other words, the property of the tribe of Yehuda. But what we need to still understand is, why was Kalev different? In what way was Kalev different than Yoshua, that he went off on his own and Yoshua stuck around with him? The truth is that beyond all the midrashim, we see a difference also in their behavior in the actual verses. When they come back, so they begin telling good things about the land. It says, "Vayisapru lo v'yamru banu el haaretz asher shlachtanu v'gam zavat chalav udvash hu v'zeh pirya." We've come to the land that indeed flows with milk and honey, and they even show here, look at this wonderful fruit. But then they say, "Efes ki aza am yoshev ba'aretz." Well, but it's no use, Efes. It's no use because we, alas, we cannot deal with the people that live there. They're too powerful. And they go into a whole list of how the whole area is populated. Then Kalev comes up. Yoshua doesn't say anything, but Kalev speaks. Vayas Kalev et ha'am el Moshe. Vayomer alo na'ale v'yarashnu ota ki yachol nochal la. So he says, alo na'ale. We shall go up, we shall, charge up the mountain and walk into the land of Israel. V'yarashnu ota, and we will inherit it. Ki yachol nuchal la. We can do it. We can do this. This is not something beyond our capabilities. And then the people that were arguing with him, the other 10, came along and said, "V'anashim asher alu imo amru lo nuchal la'alot el ha'am ki chazaku mimenu." So they say, no, we can't do it. But they didn't stop there. ויוציאו דיבת הארץ אשר תרותה לבני ישראל לאמור. They also began to now speak badly about the land itself. And say, oh, this is a place which is terrible, people can't live there, people are dying there all the time. And only then, and then they say, well, we can't do it. And the people cried out and said, oh, for the whole night they cried and said, we might as well die here, there's no way we can come to this land. Why did God bring us to this place? It would have been better for us to stay in Egypt. Perhaps we should even return to Egypt. And then it says, ויהושע בן נון וכלב בן יפונה מן אתרים את הארץ קרעו בגדיהם. Yoshua and Caleb tear their clothes. ויאמרו לכל עדת בני ישראל לאמור. And they tell the people of Israel, הארץ אשר עברנו לבא לתור אותה טובה הארץ מאוד מאוד. They insist, this is a good land. אם חפץ בנו השם, והביא אותנו אל הארץ הזאת, ונתנה לנו ארץ אשר היא זבת חלב ודבש. If God so wills it, we can come to this land. So we could see that originally the discussion was the 10 leaders said, this is a good land, but we can't deal with it. We can't tackle this challenge. It's too difficult. And Caleb said, no, we could do this. It's possible. We can. They were arguing on a technical level. Can we pragmatically believe, or rationally believe, that we can come along and take care of this challenge? And then the people said, perhaps they saw they were losing the battle, the argument, so they began to say bad things about the land itself, saying it's not even worth going there, it's a bad place, we're gonna die, it's sort of a land where you can't survive. And people began to doubt God. And then Yoshua joins Caleb and says, no, it's a wonderful land, we can do this. If God wills it, then we can do this. So you can see how this thing escalated. It started off from some sort of a pragmatic argument, and only eventually became something religious, right, where there was some question about God's ability, God's benevolence, God's hashgacha, his taking care of the people of Israel. But we see that in the first part, only Caleb is involved. And in the second part, that's where Yoshua and Caleb join together, and that's why eventually Yoshua and Caleb are the two only ones from that 10, and indeed from that generation, who actually survive to get into the land of Israel. So, with all that information, it's time for us now to try and understand the Midrash that we started with, and the real difference between Caleb and Yoshua. I think that there are two differences between them. First of all, this is an idea that I've heard from my father, is that when they went on this trip, Yoshua, in the eyes of the other 10, was already suspect. I mean, let's remember, Yoshua is not just some guy. He's not just one of the leaders. He's also Moshe's apprentice, right? Moshe's squire. I don't think there was any doubt, this is what my father pointed out, there's no doubt that Yoshua would side with Moshe, who of course believes that this is the right land to go to, and so Yoshua was already perceived as biased. So there was no question. He was no, perhaps we can imagine that when this thing was happening, he was standing already at the side of Moshe, and not, not saying anything, against the land. So even the people, everybody sort of could have predicted that this was, like Yoshua's position. Caleb, though, was, or any of the other ones, but Caleb specifically, was an unknown quantity, an unknown quality, and, people didn't know where he stood. And so his position was important, and his stance is what's mentioned. But I think that there's more to it than that. This goes back to both the Midrash that talks about Caleb's reward and Caleb's behavior and going off on his own into the land. What was the big problem? Why is it that the people of Israel sinned and got these 40 years in the desert? Why did the entire generation that left Egypt have to expire before they could move on? So it seems reasonable that, and this is an idea that appears in much of the commentary, definitely the modern commentary, that the punishment was an indication of some sort of a realization about this generation that left Egypt. That they were not ready to come into the land of Israel. Not that they weren't worthy, which is also true. This is what this sin is about. But the sin is a reflection of their still having this slave mentality, of not being able to sort of conceive of dealing with their problems on their own, of doing battle, of dealing with the hardships of coming into the land and cultivating it. And their reaction, which was this frightened reaction of, we can't deal with this problem, was an indication that this was just not right. And that it would have to take a new generation, a generation that wasn't raised as slaves in Egypt, in order to be able to do the job right. And if that is indeed the problem, we can see already that Caleb is far beyond the general state of his generation. Caleb is already in the next generation. He's already ahead of his time, and he understands really sort of what it means to be free, and what it means to be in charge of your own destiny, And you can see this in all of his behavior. He's not afraid to stand up for himself, but that's not an indication of this. But when he goes to the land, he goes off on his own. He loves the land itself. There's another midrash talks about how Kalev insisted that they take off some of the finest fruit. They all wanted to take small, petty fruit, that wouldn't show off the greatness of the land. He was saying, no, this is our future. This is, I demand that we take, a real representative of what this land can give. And since Kalev, was already there, was already at the other end of this generation, and knowing where things are going and already embracing that, you could see this both in the Midrash that says that his prize was to get a piece of the land, perhaps a larger or a more finer piece of the land, and specifically the land that he walked on, yes, the land that he traveled, that he cared about, compared to the 10 tribes who couldn't care less about this land and just wanted to go back to Egypt. But we see this also in the discussion. When the argument at the beginning was a pragmatic argument, was a rational one about can we or can't we do this, Kalev doesn't mention God once. He says, we could do this. Now, it's not that Kalev thought that God wasn't going to be there. It's not that Kalev didn't believe that in the end, God was the force behind it. But Kalev was already thinking about tactics. He was already thinking about how are we going to get this done. When he was walking in the land, he was looking at all the different fortifications and figuring out, we're going to attack here, we're going to attack there, how are we going to approach this? And so he had no problem having the argument on a pragmatic, technical field. Sort of in that realm of discussion, he felt confident that he could do something. Yoshua and the other 10 were not there yet. And herein lies the difference between Yoshua and Kalev. Yoshua, first of all, might not have wanted to talk or not have been listened to because of his connection with Moshe. But he also wasn't necessarily there. Meaning, he wasn't necessarily at the point where he could really understand how all this thing would unfold and how it would be possible for them to take over, to conquer this land. But Yoshua had something that the other 10 didn't. And that is that he believed. He believed that if Hashem says that this land can be taken over and that this is where we should be, then that's where we're going to be. He had no problem with saying, I don't understand how this is going to work, but it's going to work. And there's no need for me to know exactly the details. We'll talk to Hashem, and Hashem will tell us what to do. In this, Yoshua, in a sense, is a greater leader than Kalev is. Kalev, it's true that he's a visionary, and he's a visionary of the good kind, who really can start seeing beyond the horizon and knowing what's coming next. But part of leadership is not only being smarter than everybody else. It's not only knowing what's right. It's also knowing how to sort of deliver it, how to deal with the situation on a much more on a broader scope, so that you can also deliver it to the people. Because it's no good if you're a visionary if you can't, as a leader, if you can't translate that into something that the people can understand and relate to. When Yoshua finally gets up to speak, together with Kalev, he doesn't, even though he says, there is a little comment there about, Sal Tzila Me'aleim, maybe that their time has passed. But that whole thing is wrapped up very tightly. If you look at the verses, this is chapter 14, verses 6 until 10, you'll see that the main drive, once Yoshua takes place, is not about the technical aspect, and it's not about how great the land is. All that is there too. But the main addition is, if God says that it's possible, then it's possible. That's what Yoshua added to the discussion, and that's what makes Yoshua a greater leader, in that the people of Israel may not have been able to understand the tactics and the considerations that Kalev would have proposed to them, because they might not have been on their level, but they should be able to understand, and they could understand the idea that says, if God took us out of Egypt, and if God took care of the Egyptians and took care of Amalek and gave us the manna and took care of us in all these different stages, He can also take care of bringing us into this land. And it's true that Yoshua, in the battle between him between him and Caleb versus the other 10, he lost the battle. But at least he knew where to go, and he also could identify with what the people were going through. Caleb wasn't there anymore. He understood that this was where we're going, and there was no need to sort of stay in the past. Yoshua, as a true leader, was still, perhaps, because he allowed himself to be, and perhaps because he really was there. Yeah? He still didn't necessarily understand that. Maybe he still had some part of that in him. But it wasn't going to hold him back from moving forward, from taking the next step, and and moving on to where God indicated. And so that's where Yeshua is different. And that's why Yeshua's prize isn't the land. Because Yeshua wasn't devoted to the land in the same way that Caleb was. He was devoted to it because God said to go there. That's what we're going to do. And he was trying to be the right leader. Yeshua's prize is the portion of those 10 leaders. Basically, Hashem is saying, you, Yeshua, you deserve a leadership prize. You are the one who sort of was able to be where they were, to travel with them, to connect with them, to understand their fears, and still to move on. And unlike Caleb, who separated, went off on his own, and, went ahead. A leader has to be able to stick around and stay with the people and move on. So therefore, Caleb and Yeshua, each of them has his own greatness, his own special aspect. And therefore, each of them gets a different prize. Caleb gets the land, which he was very devoted to, and Yeshua gets leadership, which we know also eventually happens on a much greater scope when he becomes the leader of the people after Moshe dies. So with that, I wish you all Shabbat Shalom, and just to keep in mind that really many things happen in the world, and we don't always know how things will work out. Definitely today, the state of Israel and the world, but the state of Israel specifically are in very precarious situations, and sometimes we don't know how the solution will happen, but we do know that we have to start making one step at a time, and trust in Hashem that eventually things will somehow work their way out. The fact that you don't have a plan in advance doesn't mean that you can't start moving forward. I think that's Yeshua's message to us. Shabbat Shalom.